عرصات سوليد والشيل حط كله طرح بمكانه. اهدى ما هو كل شي باين في المحنة، الله بيشهد مين احنا، رجالة ضمن طرطش لك بنضرب حرب الليلة ما بنغلب، بدك شبال وعادي منهد لك، مرحب فيك في ولاد القدس مندبر حالنا نحل اللغز، رنيت على نفحة وكل بخش وقت شفنا وياما وكله بصف، ولا مرة نخاف ولا مرة ونص، بدك بركان بنفقع بوف نعمل لك حفلة تخش تنط، نستقطب مال بس بدنا نقص، ما هو كله عارف ما هو كله شايف ما هو كله خايف والدنيا ترص، استجدع دايما ووعك بوحش، انا ادرينالين فاجع بشباب ينضرب الغاز، احنا الجدعان مش زي نقلال، رد بالك عم تعيشها بلاش، سوي واعمل واجمع كاش، ما الدنيا صعيبة وبدها سلام، سيبك من روح واحضر لك جاي، انا قرش انا قرش انا قرش انا سمكة وصحابي ملان في الجلمة، مش نعمل غلبة تجينا يا خالي، بناخد العتبة تخف بالليل ندوي لك عتمة، بس شوف تنساش انا زي النو سلاح فتاك في بغز رجال تحفر انفاق، ترجع بشوال ومليان اشلاء، بلاجين 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 بالجدعنة انا فاتح دكان منبيعش هلسات، والدم مسموح بس للسباع مكتوب على القرمة، لو غاد احنا جن بنطلع ما بتشوفناش، ودموع ما تسيل اذا فش مسيل نحن الشجعان، ان قد انا اوانه وبنبخ وطن بيع مزانه، وكيف بس عرصات وسولاد والشيل حط كله طرح بمكانه، وان قد انا اوانه وبنبخ وطن بيع مزانه، وكيف بس عرصات وسولاد والشيل حط كله طرح بمكانه،
حكمت من رعب من الارض نطلع زي الجن بخ، هدي اللعب على هذا نترك على النار الافكار تنطخ، اختراق ورا حدا اذا بلغ انا مش مركب بركبش مع حدا انا فين ان امكن.
Hi everyone, welcome to the Hybrid 14 Toronto Palestine Film Festival. I'm Amanda Boulos and I'm part of the programming committee who selects and frames the work for the festival. I'm super excited for you to be joining us this year, both online and in person. We still have some tickets online, so if you want to get those, please do. Before we begin talking to Sliman Mansour today, I want to acknowledge that the Toronto Palestine Film Festival, online and in theater, operates on traditional territories of the original Indigenous caretakers of this land. So the Erie, the Petun, the Neutral, the Wendat, the Seneca, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Mississaugas of the Credit, which with whom the city of Toronto is now in treaty. So yeah, today we're going to be talking to Sliman Mansour. He's going to be presenting some work, and then there will be a moment where you could ask him questions. So a little Q&A. This artist talk is in partnership with our friends in London, Ontario, Embassy Cultural House. I would also like to thank our government supporters, the Ontario Arts Council, the Toronto Arts Council, and our gold sponsors. So thank you, Penny Appeal, Canada, Medical Aid for Palestine, and GFA Realty. Without them and other donors, this festival isn't possible. Now, I'd like to briefly introduce Sliman Mansour. Maybe he could join me on stage here while I say this little intro. Hello. So Sliman Mansour is one of the most distinguished and renowned artists in Palestine. His style embodies steadfastness in the face of relentless military occupation. His work, which has come to symbolize the Palestinian national identity, has inspired generations of Palestinians and international artists and activists alike. Mansour's artistic mediums have varied throughout his long career, changing to match his experience of displacement in his homeland and the development and transformation of Palestinian national movement. His work is housed in international collections, including the British Museum, the Museum of Fine Arts in Qatar, and the Institut du Monde Arabe in France. Mansour has also showcased his artwork at national and international exhibitions in Paris, New York, Sharjah, Abu Dhabi, and Amman. And hopefully we can get his work in Toronto in the near future. That is one of my goals. I feel like I'm in a dream talking to you today and having to share this virtual space, having spent so much time thinking and looking at your work. You've inspired me greatly. I can't express that enough. And we at the Toronto Palestine Film Festival and Toronto, the Greater Toronto Area, are so lucky to have you with us. So now, oh, you're on mute, Sliman, but now we are going to turn the floor to you, and you're going to share some work with us.
Thank you, Amanda. I think before I start talking about myself or about the Palestinian art movement under the occupation, it will be nice to give a short history about Palestinian art in general and how it developed. Nobody knows how it started and so on, but I think in the second half of the 19th century, Palestine was a little bit more open to the influence of Europeans, economically, artistically, and on all levels. So I think the art movement developed little by little from the handicraft things that they were doing for the tourists, from mother of pearl and woodwork and so on. It developed into painting. Of course, there was also a very important school of icons in Palestine doing icons for tourists and for churches. Also, the artists who were doing these icons, they changed little by little and they started doing art. When the British, when they occupied Palestine, in a short while, they created a kind of middle class people who were educated and somehow rich people who started building beautiful houses. And we can see these houses in the cities of Palestine, like Jaffa, Haifa, Jerusalem, Nazareth. So there was a need for art to be put in these houses and to be shown in these places. So artists started to come to appear, and the main subjects they were dealing with at that time was portraits of mainly diseased people, who like a rich guy whose father died and something, and still life flowers and beautiful things, landscape, and other subjects, especially by artists who went to Europe and they were really influenced by the European art schools at that time. Now we can show some slides of the works that they were done. This is by an artist from Jerusalem. This is the oldest image I could get from 1910, a portrait. Next. This is a still life by Sophie Halabi. Sophie, actually, she went to study in Italy and France, and this is an example of her work, still life. This is by Jabra, Ibrahim Jabra, who's well known as a writer, but he went to London and he was influenced by European art schools there, and this is an example of his work just before Al-Nakba. Of course, then Al-Nakba happened. Al-Nakba means the catastrophe that fell upon the Palestinian people. It affected all kinds of life, economically, culturally, everything. And so the few artists who were living at that time, they started painting about the plight of the Palestinian people and how poor they are and hopeless and helpless and so on. And this is an example by Ismail Shammout, who sometimes said to be the father of Palestinian art after the Nakba. Next. At the end of the 50s, there was another trend in Palestinian art, which is a kind of nostalgia for the good old life that people were living. These works were done by artists who were living in refugee camps in Syria and Lebanon and Jordan. It's a kind of nostalgia. They were painting the life they remember in their old villages. And this is an example by an artist called Ibrahim Ghanam. Next. Also a little bit after that, still the nostalgia thing was going on. And I must say that the nostalgia notion in Palestinian art is still going on until now. Every now and then artists, they paint works about the life they hear from their parents or from their grandparents, how beautiful it was, and the country, how beautiful it was. So artists, they paint these memories. This is by Jumana Hosseini, also about maybe Jerusalem or a village. And it shows really a kind of nostalgia and love for the life that they lost. In the middle of the 60s, 1964, the Palestinian or the PLO started working, and there were fighters, Palestinian fighters, trying to infiltrate into Israel and fight and so on. This created, I mean, the starting of the PLO, it created a kind of change in Palestinian people, among Palestinian people, and of course artists. And the image that we saw in the beginning after Al-Nakba, the hopeless, helpless figure who was in the wilderness and he don't know what to do or where to go. This hero changed and started to become a fighter, like we see in this one. And also the woman started to become a major figure, a major hero in the Palestinian artwork. Another example from the late 60s about this new notion of the Palestinian becoming a fighter and not a refugee or a poor person. Next. In the 70s, mainly among Palestinian artists who were living outside in Syria and Lebanon, and who also went to Europe to study, there was a trend of getting out of the political influence that was happening on Palestinian art. So they started dealing with other subjects, with more abstract paintings, but using, of course, still they wanted to do an Arab artwork, so they started using things like calligraphy and so on from the Arab history and culture. And this is an example of that notion. The artists who were living in Europe and in the United States and Japan, Australia, so and, you know, many places, they, of course, they were very much influenced by the art movements happening there, and little by little, they became, many of them became part of that. Of the movement, of the art movement in the country they were living in. Now we come to the art movement in the occupied territories and how it developed little by little. You know, In 1967, when the war happened, there was actually no Palestinian artists living in the West Bank and Gaza. But after some years, young artists who were studying art in Egypt mainly and in Iraq, in Syria, they started to come back to the West Bank and Gaza. They started showing their art. And the first show that happened, the first exhibition that happened was by Nabil Anani in 1972 in Jerusalem. And this exhibition attracted all artists who were living in the occupied territories, but they didn't know each other. Many of them came to this exhibition and they started meeting each other and knowing each other. And I think the second meeting, I was there also. The second meeting, we decided to form a union for these artists. There were around 18, 19 artists living in the West Bank and Gaza. Next, please. So some of us wanted to get a permission from the Israeli authorities to work as a legal union, and they applied for a permission to work as a union, but in a short time, I think in 2-3 days, they received a rejection. They are not allowed to make a union, but nevertheless, we went on and we formed that group of artists. We called it the Palestinian Artist League Under Occupation, and we made our first exhibition in Jerusalem. That was 1975. This painting was one of the paintings that was in that exhibition, and it's mine. What happened at that time is that we, as a league, we were young artists. We wanted, and we were very much political, and we wanted to show our work to the whole Palestinian community. But it was very hard to move exhibition from one place to the other. First, because of Israeli checkpoints, and mainly because there was no infrastructure to show exhibitions, like no galleries, no museums, no halls to show exhibitions, and even in some villages and towns there were no electricity. So we thought it's a good idea if we print our works as posters and we distribute them or sell them cheaply to people and everywhere. And this idea, it was a real success because in like a short time, in several months, people had our works hanging in their homes all over Palestine. And it also, many of these posters, they were smuggled to Jordan, and they started being present in Palestinian houses in Jordan. So at that time, we started this kind of poster printing thing. Next, please. Also, this one was among the first exhibition in 1975, and it was also printed as a poster and as a calendar. I remember for a woman association, and it was very successful. It was, the main concern of Palestinian artists at that time, and it seems still going on until now, is the question of identity. It was, we heard Golda Meir, the Prime Minister of Israel. I heard her. I remember she was saying, "Where is the Palestinian people?" They denied the existence of the Palestinian people, and not only in Israel but also in many European and in the United States, of course. They denied our existence. So our main concern was that we want to show the whole world that we exist, and on all levels, writers, poets, they were writing literature about Palestinian identity, theater, music, artists, everybody was doing art about the identity. But in visual art, identity is a kind of abstract notion. It's an abstract thing. So we started searching for images to show the Palestinian identity. We took, of course, from Islamic art, we took the calligraphy, even some of the way Islamic art was done, two-dimensional, there is no perspective. We took from Palestinian village life, like the customs, Palestinian customs, especially the embroidered customs, as you can see in this painting. Also, we thought that the landscape is also a very important image to show Palestinian identity, because any landscape was done by our forefathers. They built the stone terraces that show on mountains everywhere, and they were the people who planted the olive trees and the orange trees and all these things. So it was like an act of the Palestinian people, the Palestinian landscape. From Palestinian folk art also, a lot from things that people use in their houses, in the villages. Carpets that are made by hand, and even bread. Next, please. Like this one, also mixing between poetry and visual art. Like this painting is called the Sad Tune. Also mixing between music and the landscape and the Palestinian embroidery and customs. Next, please. Jerusalem, as you remember from the first image, was and is still until now a very important image to representing Palestinian identity. We believe, of course, that Jerusalem, the Jerusalem that we see now, was built by Palestinians, was built by our forefathers. The wall of Jerusalem, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the Dome of the Rock, everything. So Jerusalem, and also because of its religious importance, it started to represent Palestine. I mean, the image of Jerusalem representing Palestine, and then little by little, even the Dome of the Rock alone, it started to represent Palestine in general. Next, please. In 1981, we were aware of the importance of the landscape. So we started, this is by an artist called Nabil Anani from Halhul. So we, as artists, we started going in groups to villages to paint the landscape or to paint the villages. Until now, I see sometimes men or women who say that I remember you when you came to my village and you were painting and so on. I mean, we created a kind of atmosphere that was strange to the local Palestinian people. Next, please. These are sketches and some images of the from 81 painting the villages and the landscape. Next, please. Another one. Next, please. Now, this painting is also from the influence of the village life. It's called taboon bread, and it's especially it is not made anywhere in the Middle East, only in Palestine. It's done by something called taboon, and it's very tasty, of course, but it became a kind of symbol for Palestinian identity. Now, we printed this painting as a poster, and when I did it as a like study or exercise in egg tempera. That was my main concern, is to make egg tempera painting, and I did it with egg yolk and with all the stuff that is done by the egg tempera. And when I printed it in 1982, I think, it became popular, and people gave it a kind of political meaning, which means that Palestinians can live in the cheapest way, and they can survive in the hardest of conditions. Next, please. It's an example of a poster that I did and became very popular in 1976. This was a school girl who was killed by the Israeli soldiers. She was coming back from her school and was shot. And I don't know what happened there, but it became a very famous event, and people were angry for the killing of this girl, and I painted this poster. I also was angry, but I don't remember the exact events of that time. And it was made a poster and was very popular. But it was I wanted to tell the story of this painting because it gives you an idea about the problems that art we were doing. I mean, we were living in and are still living in. This painting was burnt in Gaza in 1979, I think. We took an exhibition from Ramallah from Jerusalem to Gaza to show it in an institution called the Red Crescent Society in Gaza. That was well known for its left-wing leadership of that association. I don't know if you remember Dr. Haidar Abdul Shafi. He was the head of that association, and he was a kind of very left-wing person. And they had a library in that association. This library had books about Marx, Lenin, and about social issues and so on. And Muslim Brotherhood, I think Brotherhood, they were demonstrating after the Friday prayer, and they came to this association and set fire in the library of that association, because this library has books that are against religion or something like that. And the whole exhibition was burned, including this painting. Next, please. In 1981, the Israeli authorities, they closed a gallery in Ramallah, who was the only gallery, and I was one of the owners of this gallery. They closed it and they took the keys and went away. And after about 2 weeks, they called me and my two friends who are the managers of this gallery. And they gave us several orders. Two of them were very strange and very hard. One of them was that we are not allowed to show any artwork in the West Bank and Gaza unless we show it to the Israeli censorship, to the Israeli military censorship, and we should take each work should be stamped by this censorship. And the other rule was that we are not allowed to paint in red, green, black, and white. These are the colors of the Palestinian flag. Now, this second rule, the rule we did follow both rules. We decided that we are not going to show any of our works to the censorship, and like 2 years after that ruling, many Palestinian paintings were painted in red, green, black, and white. It's like showing the Israeli military that we don't agree to their rules. Next, please. This is also an example of the art that artists were doing. This is by an artist from Gaza called Kamel Mughani. And there was a kind of game play between the soldiers and the artists. The artists, they were putting symbols in their paintings that they think the soldiers would not understand, but people understand. Like this painting, it looks like it's a simple woman with Palestinian dress holding a jar of water. But if you look closely at the jar, it's more like a hand grenade than a jar. This kind of hiding the real issue and doing things in symbolism. And this is an example of that. Next, please. Next. This is another example by an artist, Talib Duek. He is from Jerusalem, and this looks like a landscape of Jerusalem, but people found that if they look closer, they can see a dead woman lying in a coffin, and the woman is pregnant, and so on. It represents a kind of sad or unhealthy atmosphere that we live in the occupied territories and mainly in Jerusalem. Next, please. I did it from personal experience. I was imprisoned in 1982, not for a long time, like 30 days, and I passed all these things here, like putting a bag on my head and handcuffed and beaten, and so when I came out, I thought it will be a good idea to paint my experience. Next, please. Always the issue of peace and people, they always and until now, and I think until tomorrow and after tomorrow, Palestinians, they really want peace and they want to live like normal, like any other normal people. Every artist, in some time in his life, he painted paintings about peace and the longing for peace. And this is an example that I did in 1986, I think. It's called Hope. Hope. Next, please. Olive, I mean olive picking and olive in general. Olive is, little by little, it started to symbolize the Palestinian land that was occupied after 1967, and the orange tree, or the orange, it symbolized the land that was occupied in 1948. And I recently did the painting with a tree that is half an olive tree and half an orange tree, symbolizing that Palestine as a whole, with these two symbols. I mean, working in the land, working in the field was very attractive and very important issue for the Palestinian people. And it's not only a nice painting; it's more like kind of asking the people to go back to their land, because many people were leaving their land to work as laborers and as workers in Israeli settlements and in Israeli institutions. And the land was left alone. And so these paintings that we did about people working in the land was actually a kind of call to the Palestinians to go back to their land. Next, please. This painting I did in just before the intifada, and I called it Intifada. This painting is actually in the Institut du Monde Arabe in Paris, and it shows like people are trying to get rid of barbed wire that surrounds them, and it's like prophesizing the happening of the Intifada that happened some months later after I finished this painting. Next, please. At the beginning of the next Intifada, we see artists, they changed their art in a way that they became more courageous to use colors and to use strong brush strokes. And so this is an example of young artists who are painting about the Intifada. If you see this artist, Youssef Dweck, his former painting before this time, you could see that it is very minimalistic, and the paint is very done in care and so on. But at that time, it changed a lot. Next, please. And also, this is another example of the art that was done in the beginning of the first Intifada. Young people throwing stones, using these slings to throw stones, and things are burning, and there is a lot of violence in these paintings. Next, please. Next. Also, because of the Intifada, there were like 9,000 or 10,000 people in Israeli prisons, and this is and the biggest one was in the Negev, in the Naqab. So many stories came out from this prison, and how people are treated there, and how people are being tortured and so on. So I did this painting commemorating the memory of this prison. Next, please. And also this, in 1989, I think, I was still painting in oils and so on, and there were at that time a lot of people who were killed. I mean, during the Intifada, young people. So this painting is called Daily Rituals or something like that, and it is like showing the daily life of Palestinian people. Now, after some time after the first year of the Intifada, the philosophy of the Intifada was to boycott Israeli products and not to buy anything from Israel. And I, as an artist, I thought, why I don't do the same? Why should I buy oil paint or whatever paint from Israeli shops and then I paint against Israel or against the occupation, which is not nice. So I started searching for natural materials, and I thought about, I remembered me helping my grandmother when I was a child, doing things from mud, like beehives or things. And so I started experimenting and doing art in mud. And this is an example from 1989, using mud as a medium, because I was coloring mud, with pigments, with powder pigments and so on. So it looked like oil painting, but the actual material was mud. Next, please. The graffiti at that time was, in that Intifada was the main thing, because it was like the newspaper of the people and of the various political factions, the wall you could see slogans by Fatah, by the PLFP, by Hamas, and everyone is doing his graffiti on the wall, not touching the other graffiti, but beside it and so on. So the walls were really like a painting of like this person who dripples paint. Anyway, it's full of painting. Next, please. Nabil Anani, who also was working at that time, he, without us discussing about it, he was also experimenting and doing art in leather and henna. And this is an example of the art that he was doing. When I visited him in his studio at that time, I was really astonished that he's doing the same thing I'm doing, searching for natural materials to do art. And then we went and visited another artist, and we also see him like trying to make ink from plants, from onions, from rumman, from whatever, to paint with that ink, so we decided to work together to see what happens at that time, and we formed a group called New Vision Group. Next, please. This is by Taysir Barakat, who was making his own ink from boiling whatever fruits or vegetables. Next, please. Stone also became an important issue because it was the weapon of the ordinary people. They only had stones to fight with, Any scratches on a stone or any art that has been done on the stone became very popular, and this is an example of art done on the stone. Next, please. This I did in 1996. As you saw before, I did art with mud, but I colored the mud with powder pigment and so on. And of course, when the mud dries, there were a lot of cracks. I was angry from these cracks, and I wanted to hide them. So it was real hard because the painting, I did it twice, even 3 times, just to close the cracks and to hide them. But little by little, I started to see the beauty of the cracks. And so they became the real issue in my work. And this is an example of dealing with mud and cracking. This work is called Shrinking Object, and I wanted to show the shrinking idea of Palestine. You know, it started with the whole of Palestine, as you see, then little by little, and because of the political developments and so on, the idea of Palestine started to shrink in the minds of the politicians. Next, please. Now, of course, working in mud, mud is a medium that people do three-dimensional things with it, like a pot or like a statue or something, and little by little, this material, the mud, it forced me to do relief work and also sculptures and three-dimensional objects. Next, please. Next. Yeah, this is another example of the cracking. What attracted me also to the mud is its symbolism, because it's a symbol of the land. I mean, me, instead of painting a landscape, I was painting with the material of the landscape, and it's also a symbol of human beings, because they were created from mud, and they go back to be mud, and and also because at that time even I was feeling I'm becoming old, and these cracks, it's like symbolized me in a way. Next, please. After years of working in mud, you know, I came back to the canvas and painting and drawing, and but of course the main subjects were still the confiscation of land and settlements and checkpoints and towers that, you know, watch upon the Palestinian people, over the Palestinian people. The same subjects didn't change a lot, because the occupation is still the same, and the occupation is still acting the same as if it started yesterday. Next, please. This is a painting I like. It's we have a piece of land in Birzeit. That's my hometown. And this piece of land, this is the land. And we had a person from Birzeit who was working in this land all the time, plowing it and picking the olives and all these things. And he became old, and when I see him, he always talk about this piece of land and how beautiful it is, and we should take care of the stone terraces, and we should so on. And it's like, for him, it became like a painting in a museum, admiring it all the time and watching over it. And so I did this painting in his memory of this guy. He died some years ago. Next, please. Yes, every now and then people who really came back to their land, and they take care of the land. They create something like this. It's like a piece of land in the desert that's alive, and I don't know what to say it in English, but it's really a living piece of land among or in the center of the wilderness. And still the occupation you can see up there on the horizon, the watchtower, it's still there. It's kind of a threat that is threatening this land, and it's a symbol of the threat that the Palestinian people in general is facing with the occupation. Next, please. The wall that the Israelis built on Palestinian land and to steal Palestinian land under the pretense of security, it became a very important issue in Palestinian art. And for several years, all artwork, all paintings, they were about this wall. I wanted to make a painting on the wall. So I said I will first of all make a sketch on the computer, and I took the hands of Michelangelo and put them apart on the wall, and it's Photoshop. And I went to the wall to start painting on it, and then I saw the wall, which is, when I became near the wall, it was so huge, like 8 meters. I don't know how many in feet is that, but it's so huge and so big, and I was afraid to paint on the wall. It's too much work for me at that time, and so I kept the sketch, and I also made it like a postcard, and it became very popular, and it like symbolize it shows the wall as it is, as I wanted it to be. Next, please. Checkpoints, this is I did a series of painting about the checkpoint during the second intifada that started in 2000. There were like around 500 checkpoints on Palestinian land, and it made lives so it's like hell. You can't, if you want to go from one town to the next town that's beside you, it might take you like one day waiting in the checkpoint and walking in the wilderness, and if old men and babies were walking in the among the stones and the rocks and so on. It was really a very sad way of living, and it went on for several years. Now it's a little bit easier, but still many checkpoints are still there. Like this painting is an example of waiting on the checkpoint, and even I painted myself inside this block here. It's like people are imprisoned in these blocks of cement. Next, please. This I called homeland. It also speak about the checkpoints and the waiting on the checkpoints, and it's like people were living in the checkpoints. And it became like the checkpoints became like our homeland. This painting also is about land confiscating. People still every year in October, November, they do like rituals, picking olives in these 2 months. But this painting, I did it that they are doing the same things, they are picking olives, but there is no, there are no olive trees, there is no land, but still they are doing their rituals every year. Next, please. Yeah, it's like when occupation become normal and people get accustomed to it. This, I call it quiet morning. This woman is sitting, starting to drink her coffee, and but still the barbed wire is still around the olive tree and all over, and she's like accustomed to that situation. And I painted this painting just to criticize that kind of way of life. Next, please. This is like painting Jerusalem from the rooftops. Well, everybody did it, so I thought it's a nice idea to paint Jerusalem from inside, from the quarters where people are living and so on. So it's like my try to paint Jerusalem from inside. Next, please. Sometimes an artist put several symbols in the work, like the Dome of the Rock, Jerusalem, Palestinian dress, Palestinian woman, and dove peace, and so on. It's a mixture of symbolism to show our yearning for peace and normal life. Women in our work has become very important. As I said, it's in the beginning it symbolized the revolution, and then it became to symbolize the homeland as a whole, and it has also roots in ancient culture, like the Canaanite culture. Most important goddess of that time were women, and so on. So women in our culture, from the old times until now, play an important role in our culture. Next, please. Whenever I have an idea using mud, I always yearn for working in mud, especially in summer. In winter, it's very cold and hard. So I had an idea to paint about a situation of woman, using mud and paint, and I came out with this painting. Or I don't know what I call it. It's a work of art, not a painting. Next, please. The Holy Family, it's like Jesus Christ is and Mary and Joseph and all these people that we believe they were Palestinians. They were wearing Palestinian dress. I've seen in Japan icons with Japanese faces of Christ and Mary, and in Africa I saw black Christ and black Mary and so on. So I thought, why don't I do the Holy Family as they really were, Palestinians. Next, please. Yeah, this is also about people who vanished. They are there with their it's like ghosts, these people who built Jerusalem and who made life in Jerusalem. It's, now they are dead, of course, or they are refugees. So they are still there, but like ghosts and not real people. Yeah, this is like 5-meter painting as I did for Arafat Museum, and I was doing my role was to paint about from 1948 until 1992, just before the Oslo Agreement, and the developments that happened during this time, and this is what I came up with. Next, please. I took a part of that painting, that big painting, and because sometimes I feel that our struggle, as it used to be, is kind of funny, nowadays, with this, with young, new ideas, new mediums, new technology. So I made this kind of combination between people marching for the liberation of Palestine, but other people are sitting on the sea shore, having fun with the sun and so on. Next, please. Also, especially during the Syrian war that happened, and the idea of the refugee came again to our mentality, to our brains, and I was thinking about the refugees, the Palestinian refugees, and the immigrants who go they travel to other places and live there. But I've been to the United States, I've been to Canada, for a short time, and to many places, and I met Palestinians living there, who immigrated and became part of that country. But still, when you go to their homes and when you speak with them, they are still Palestinians with their culture, with their, like, they carry their history and their culture with them wherever they go. And this is an example, and this is how I saw them, Next, please. Yeah, this is, the last years, there was, even before the Abraham peace accords or something, we felt that there is a trend among these Arab countries to make peace with Israel, and this make us very sad, and we felt not for long, but for a while, we felt very lonely. And I did this painting, like we are living, we are marching in the wilderness. Nobody is around us. Nobody is supporting us, but still we will go on. We will march on. We will still carry Palestinian flag. We will still carry the Palestinian cause and go on. Next, please. Yeah, this is about Bethlehem. The last time I went to Bethlehem was at the Christmas last year, the last time, but I went there at that time and it was closed. Like Bethlehem was surrounded by a wall and there is a gate. On that gate, there are soldiers and they closed the gate, so Bethlehem is like a big prison. So I thought gave me an idea to make Bethlehem with the Virgin Mary and with Jesus Christ, like being in prison with Israeli soldiers around them. Next, please. I hope this is the last one. This is like getting free, trying to jump out to become free. It's like an example of how people feel. They just want to use any way to get rid of the situation they live in. Now, this is it came to me, like. Thank you.
Thank you. That was wonderful. I love you're very popular. You have so many questions in the chat and so much love in the chat. So I'm not going to ask you too many questions myself. I'm going to read some of these questions here, but I do just want to say, for those living in the diaspora, seeing your depictions of Palestinian bodies and Palestinian women specifically, it really does, it gets me the closest to a visual representation of my aunts and my grandparents and my mother. They're always leaning forward, they're always loving, and the big hands are always giving or holding. And I think that is super powerful for people who are any Palestinian living in Palestine or outside of it. But yeah, this depiction of love is so strong in your figural work. I wonder
I think it's not only for Palestinians who live abroad, it's also for Palestinians who live now, because these aunts, these grandmothers, they are away now, they are either dead or whatever. So it's a kind of nostalgia, for protection, for love, and for homeland,
But it's a nostalgia that stays. That is the strongest thing my family holds on to, is this caring and this love and this idea of holding. I wonder if you could talk about how the bodies, how your figures, why they are always leaning or always holding, is my question for you.
It's not an artist, and first of all, he doesn't, no artist likes to interpret his work, but anyway, the leaning position is kind of sad, for me. It's like my paintings, they show the sadness. And this leaning, the head and so on, I think it shows a kind of sadness that I feel, and most of the Palestinians, they feel. But still, the figure is strong, and hands are big, protecting, and leaning head is not the end of it, it seems.
Yeah, I feel that strongly. Okay, I'm going to hand it over to the crowd. I have a bunch of questions for you here. I'm going to start with Raed says, I would love to know what would be the closest piece to your heart and why? What's your favorite piece?
Also, this question is because I've read many artists who answer this kind of question. It's usually every artist is being asked this question, and every artist answers always the same: that these are all my children, and I love them all. And I have the same answer also.
Okay. Yeah, I answer the same way. I have a question. Maybe I'll combine some questions. I have one from Abraham Abusita. He's asking, do you have any advice for Palestinians or artists living in the diaspora, but I would extend that. Do you have any advice for future artists, artists who are working now and, 10 years, 20 years from now?
Yeah, of course, I advise them to benefit from the new technologies, to try whatever they can, and try to benefit from also the atmosphere or the country they live in, from their culture. Palestinian culture in general is well known for its diversity, and Palestinians are very much diverse people, you can find black Palestinians, and you can find like fair-haired Palestinians that look like Norwegians sometimes in Hebron or somewhere. It depends on the area also, sometimes. And culture is also the same. We have, there is a lot of, because Palestine was like a passage for armies, for empires, for cultures, from Greek to Italian to Persian to Egyptian to whatever. And they all passed Palestine, and they left their stamp there. And the Palestinians are a mixtures of all these cultures. So don't be shy, don't be afraid. Benefit from the culture you are living in. Use the technology that you can use, and so on. And but the most important thing is stay Palestinian. Belong to the Palestinian people, belong to the Palestinian culture. Without belonging to something, artists are lost. They don't know what to do. If you feel that you belong, you believe in a cause, deeply, that will enhance your art, that will enhance your culture.
Yeah, I have a quote from you from a different interview. You said, to all Palestinians, give part of your life to Palestinian people. Not everything, just a piece. And I love that. Yeah, we were talking to Samia Halabi just, 6 months ago, and she's working with, computer art. She's working with new materials and, engaging in a new space, which I find very inspiring. I love that advice. Okay, maybe two more questions I have. So S. Sahba Al-Shawa says, I believe art is not as valued as it should be in society. As you've shown, Palestinian art is an important form of resistance. The question is, how has the perception of your work shifted over the years? And how can aspiring Palestinian artists use their talent to further our cause? I also want to add, you've been so popular on Instagram. You're getting so much love and so much attention. So maybe this question can cover that as well.
I didn't change. If you notice, if you look at my work, from the early 70s until now, I didn't change a lot. My ideas and so on, maybe I changed some kind of artistic skills and so on, but not much. But when I used the Instagram, people started to know me. Before that, they didn't know me, so I became suddenly and so popular. But from the people that they know me before, I was popular at that time. So and my posters that they were selling so much, and simple homes in villages and camps everywhere in the whole Arab world also. In Morocco, I saw a person living from reproducing my camel of hardship, painting it again and again and again and selling it in Morocco. So that made me very happy. But what was the question again?
Yeah, how has the perception of your work shifted over the years? And then the second one is, how can aspiring Palestinian artists use their talent to further our cause?
This is a complicated question. I answered the first one that I didn't change a lot, But the second one is a little bit complicated because advancing Palestinian cause has two aspects. One aspect is on the international level, and one aspect is among the Palestinian people. Now, they contradict each other in art, If you want to be an international artist and you want to be part of the contemporary art movement, you have to do art that ordinary people, they don't understand. So they will not appreciate it. But on the other hand, you become well-known and you advance the Palestinian culture and you advance the Palestinian people in a different way, which is also important. It depends on the artist and what way he chooses or she chooses. And both are important. Both are very important. To be part of the world art movement, with the contemporary conceptual things, art, and using photography, video art, and everything. This is very important, and it puts Palestinians on the map of the world culture. That's important. The other important thing is that maybe what I am doing, I'm still very close to ordinary people. I'm still very close to Palestinians, and I do that, and this is my choice, and I'm not better than others, or they are not better than me. But every person chooses his own way, and everything you do in art is very important and very helpful. Maybe if not now, in the future, but it's really helpful.
That's wonderful. I don't know if we should end here, or do you want one more question? How are you feeling?
Me?
Yes.
No, I can take another.
Okay.
One.
One? Okay. Let's do one more. So Zad Moht says, can you tell us more about the Nazarene painting? Is there a painting that the public have never seen, or you don't know where it actually is now, but really want the people to see it? If yes, could you tell us about it?
There are many paintings that, in the 70s, early 80s, we were not, me and most Palestinian artists living under occupation, we were not aware of the importance of documenting our art. And so we used to send paintings to exhibitions outside, to the United States, to Europe, to wherever. And some exhibitions were burned, and many paintings were confiscated by the Israeli authorities. So not all of them that were confiscated or were burned or were lost or even were sold, and I don't know where they are. They were not documented. Not only one, but many. And I remember I lost in the United States, we made an exhibition in 1977. I lost several paintings that were stolen, I think, from exhibitions, and because the people who were responsible for these exhibitions, they are not artists. They don't know how to deal with art and with paintings, and they were politicians in general, like the PLO office here or PLO office there, and so there are a lot of paintings that were lost and they were sold, I don't know where, and they are not documented. Not only one, money. And now I'm really sad because you should have been so more cautious about documenting things. And this is also an advice I give it to young artists, to document everything they do. It's very important, not only for the next generation of artists or people who are interested in art, but for the artist himself or herself to know how they develop and so on. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That is also great advice at the end. Some will argue that we document too much, the paintbrush, the palettes, everything. But thank you so much, Sliman Mansour. This was amazing from the bottom of our hearts, from TPFF and all of Toronto. Thank you for that generous talk and answering all those questions.
You're welcome. Thank you.
I hope we could see you in person sometime soon in Toronto. But
Inshallah, inshallah.
Yeah, inshallah. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you, everyone. That's a conclusion.